Okay, now on to another use of plastic use of stone is another house of Horta's in Brussels. And when I say plastic, stone, so here he is carving, having the stone carved so that it really undulates. And then, of course, the iron also undulates in a echoing rhythm. By the way, whenever you see houses by Horta, and there are only 4 that exist, they are through block houses. They go from street to street. So you look at this slide and if you look at that picture and you try to find this, you won't find it, even though this is the same house. This view is facing one street, and this is the view from the other street, just so you know, and if you wondered about that. This is Horta's own house. This was his office next door to his house. Now, his house does not have as much carved stone because carved stone is quite expensive. His clients were extremely wealthy, but he was not. And so there's still some marvelous use of metals in making these wonderful forms. Less use of stone. One more view of the outside of his house. And it's now a museum in Brussels. It is the Victor Horta Museum. Okay, that's Mr. Horta. This is the inside of the house, the Horta Museum. Art Nouveau as a style really lasted 10 years. And by 1905, it had pretty much run its course. And one reason you can tell that it's extremely expensive to do this kind of detailing. This is the only stair bracket in the house that looks like this. And that's a piece of cast bronze. So just to make that casting is an immense amount of work, and it's expensive. So one of the reasons is that only the very wealthy could afford Art Nouveau design. This is the same house. This is looking towards the dining room. And here, Horta is using glazed brick, along with marble as the marble wainscoting, but this is glazed brick. Well, glazed brick up to this period had only been used in large commercial buildings. It would have been used in exhibit buildings. It was beginning to be used in the interiors of subway systems, which were being built in Paris and in Brussels, but it was never, ever used on the inside of a house. Horta is the first person to use wrought iron inside a house, and he's also the first person to use glazed brick. So I find this a fascinating image because this is a devotional bas-relief, as you can tell, that's sort of reminiscent of Renaissance forms, both of these, set in a very graceful, classic arch, and then set off with absolutely, completely new, never seen before details in wrought iron. And look at the detail in the same room. Here's the top of that cabinet. Same room. It's a sideboard for the dining room. This is what's new. This is what's happening. This is what is this kind of fantastic exuberance and playing with materials. And the fact is, Horta was a master at this. This isn't just some hodgepodge of experiments with materials. The whole house holds together. If you look at this photograph, the whole house holds together. These arches, the detailing is there. A number of very unusual and for the time absolutely completely radical solutions to stair railings and to stair brackets and to this structural element here that's basically holding the arch together. But it holds together beautifully. And lastly, I just want to mention Horta's light is incredibly important to him. And he started out his career designing greenhouses in Brussels. And every house of his has huge skylights up at the top that bring the light down into the interior of the house as much as possible. Those are some Art Nouveau buildings. I want to show you a few decorative arts objects from the time. Back to the piece of music that we started with is called O so sprach Zarathustra. Well, that is based on a Nietzsche book. And so this is an edition of a book by Friedrich Nietzsche called Also sprach Zarathustra. Thus spake Zarathustra. So this is just a beautiful binding. Van de Velde was an Austrian-born German designer who did a wide variety of decorative arts and also interiors. This is one of his interiors, which was for a store, a cigar store in Berlin. The chairs you see here, this is a very typical Van de Velde chair, as is this, and this is called, there it is there. That chair is still in production, called the Havana chair. And this is Van de Velde's classic chair. And a lovely piano bench that he designed for his wife, who was a concert pianist. Van de Velde, Horta is full of kind of this exuberance I talked about. Van de Velde is more measured. He's a little more poetic, but first and foremost, his interest is in line and in the power of line. And it's really, I think, evident particularly in that piano bench. Another person who's very interested in line, who was a contemporary of Van de Velde's, is Richard Reimer-Schmidt. And I want to talk about this chair in a detail, because this chair speaks a lot about this movement at the moment. Unlike Hector Guimard's Art Nouveau furniture, which was full of curlicues and floral shapes that just were often kind of got to be grotesque, Reimer-Schmidt is using form and shape and line, but in a very measured way, and yet the result is, I think, exquisite. And I want to show you why I think that. This stretcher is, as you see, connected. It is mortised into this leg. It has this slight curve in two directions going up, but the most gentle curve meeting the back. Now, if you look at this chair, there's a certain logic to it. You look at that and you say, well, yeah, A, it looks comfortable, but B, it's kind of obvious. Well, why doesn't everybody make their chair like this? I mean, here's this one stick that clearly supports you as you lean back, and it clearly it helps hold up the seat. Here's the detail of where it meets the seat, right here. And it's let into the side of the seat, like so that they're built into each other. The seat support thickens right here where it meets the rear, just structurally, just the right amount, so that the seat is properly supported and that there's enough meat in the wood here to make a solid connection to keep the chair sturdy forever. And then there's this beautiful detail. Now I said when you build with wood it's not plastic, but when you work with wood at this scale it is plastic. And this is I think a really interesting detail. Here's this chair. Yes, it's simple, there's an economy of material, but then there's this gesture right here that is hand carved and echoed with a little recess there. It's a carving that goes across both of these joints, and it's just that little bit of handwork that gives the chair a kind of an emotional resonance, I think. Reimer Schmidt was also designed textiles. He did interiors, and also there's an object that he designed, a simple candlestick. And when I saw that candlestick, I have to say the first thing that came to mind is this drawing of Michelangelo's. Because I think the gesture is very similar. Look at how this absolutely relies on this elbow to support the candlestick. And of course, in this figure, the elbow is what supports the body. And this is, of course, one of Michelangelo's detail sketches for the Sistine Chapel. But I think and notice then the head turns up here so that it's perpendicular to the ground. Now, of course, a candlestick has to be perpendicular to the ground, otherwise it'll drip all over everything. So there's a functionality to it, but there's also this kind of grace. So look at this. This is just a grace note. I mean, is that necessary? No, it's not absolutely necessary part of the candlestick. But look how there's a certain reflection here. Did he get inspired by Michelangelo? I have no idea. It's just that it speaks of a kind of an association. I'm going to show you a couple of other Art Nouveau projects in Europe that you might not have seen anywhere before. And I want to introduce you to them. And what I try to do in this course is there are a certain number of classic projects that any art history class covers. But I also want to introduce you to a variety of things that you will not see in any other history course, because I think they're overlooked. I think sometimes they're very important, and they've been left out of the kind of the lexicon. And this is one of those buildings. This building is an early project by a man named Eliel Saarinen, father of Eero Saarinen, who came to the United States and became a well-known designer in his own right. Saarinen is a Finn by birth and was commissioned to design the Finnish pavilion in the same place that Loie Fuller had her pavilion, the dance pavilion, that same exhibition. There was a Finnish pavilion. And this is it. The Finns have their own very particular culture. The building that I'm showing you here is not necessarily Art Nouveau, but it is really an exemplary piece of design from exactly the same period. And it's useful sometimes to look at forms that are coming in from other part of the world, and particularly when they're from Eliel Saarinen. So look at these devices here on the roof. They have no particular function. They are decorative. Keep in mind, by the way, all buildings for World's Fairs are designed to be torn down. They don't ever stay up. I mean, when you go to LaGuardia Airport, there's 2 buildings left from the 1964 World's Fair that I can tell you I remember very clearly. But there's only 2 buildings left that are those big, round, tall things. The rest of that World's Fair, which took up that whole Corona Park, is long gone. So a building like this was only meant to last a couple of years. Giving the designer kind of free rein to be more creative, to do things that are perhaps a little more daring than they might otherwise undertake. So what I love about these devices is that they're reflected again here in a larger way on top of this piece, and then we see it again up here. This very marvelous kind of repetition of form. Look here. So you follow these down into the columns that support the roof, and you have this kind of this low brow of a roof meeting these forms, again in stone, that are at each window. There's a beautiful rhythm here in this building that I think is quite remarkable. It's skylit, as you can see. And then the interior is full of, it's very much its own language. This, sorry, I'll back up. This is actually a kind of a reliquary. Here the Finns they wanted to celebrate a meteorite that had landed in Finland 3 years before. So this is actually a meteorite in there, and it's kind of marvelous reliquary. But what I want to point your attention to are these exhibition cases back here. We have very few photographs of this building, and so you're looking at what we have. But look at the foxes on top of the exhibition cases, which speak to certain myths and fauna in Finnish culture.